us here and pay our respects to elders past and present on whose land we're holding the Garma festival. Welcome as well to our viewers right across Australia watching this on Sky News. We're here today to discuss lifestyle choices that the Prime Minister so aptly put it. People who live on homelands and what their future may be and the precariousness of that future, what it is like to live in a remote community. We have an extraordinary panel today with us to be able to discuss this, all aspects of this question. We have Mununggurr, of course, who is here to discuss it, Chairman of the Homelands. We have also Ms. Yananymul Mununggurr as well from the Irukala Community Arts Board, Bill Gray, former senior public servant, extensive experience in Indigenous affairs. Indeed, from 87 to 88, he was chairman of the Australian and Torres Strait Islander Commission Task Force and secretary of the Department of Aboriginal Affairs from 1988 to 1990. Mr. Samuel Bush-Blanasi, who is sitting here next to me as well, of course, chairman of the Northern Land Council since 2013. Anthony Watson, chairman of the Catherine Land Council, and Nolan Hunter. Sorry about that. And Nolan Hunter, Chief Executive Officer of the Kimberley Land Council, and also someone who's just returned from the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues. I want to start, of course, I will start with you, Anthony, because in Kimberley you're at the forefront of this. These were the lifestyle choices that the Prime Minister had spoken about. How did you feel when you heard that phrase, when you heard the questions being raised about the validity and the future and the viability of remote communities?
I was balanced by the comment that the Prime Minister said that today, and it's not our choice, but we grew up in these small towns. We were born in Arden communities, and so it was shocking for him to say that. And so we responded to say that we live in these communities and we could have been born in India or Africa, so we're born in Australia, and that's the place that we live in the Kimberleys.
Tell us a bit more about that. What does it mean to people? If you're living in a city and you're thinking about these communities, if indeed people in the cities think about these communities at all, they're remote, they're far from service. We hear about the struggles to find employment, to get education for kids. And it leads people in the cities to wonder, would I want to live there? What's the future of communities that struggle so much? Tell us about why those communities are so important.
It's a sense of belonging, that we belong to the community. We're born there, and we see that there's a lot of opportunities that we can do. We grew up in the parcel industry, in the pearling industry, and it's a setting that we got used to. We ate the food from the country. We know the songs of the country, and it was our lifestyle that we was from that area, and we comfortable with those areas. So I thought I had no choice. I was born in that country, so I'm inheriting all of these traditional, cultural, and historical belongings to me.
Nolan, you took this to the United Nations. You spoke at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues, advocating against the closure of remote Indigenous communities. What did you tell the UN?
Look, the point of going to the UN, we realised that it wasn't the complete answer, but it was one of the additional ways that we could raise the attention to what the state government was intending to do. We also, so we were raising the profile of the discussion at an international level, and obviously the Australia's commitment and endorsement in 2009 of the UN Declaration. We believe that this was really about our rights, so it was appropriate for us to go to the UN, and also to engage with other global Indigenous representatives who could support our position. We lodged an intervention statement, and the amount of support we got for that was overwhelming. We'd met with
I just want to stop you on that point. The support that you had, I want to ask about the awareness in an international forum, in the international community, about these issues, about the issues that Indigenous people in Australia face, particularly remote communities.
Look, people in the world were aware, and particularly Indigenous people there had heard of what was happening. And it was amazing because while they were there to talk about and lodge interventions about their own issues in their own countries, a lot of them took the opportunity to mention what was happening in Western Australia and the closure of communities, Indigenous communities. So, people were aware, and we were also aware that other countries, and if you look at New Zealand with the Maori Party, writing to the Prime Minister to raise their concern, and other countries as well.
Bill Gray, part of the argument about the sustainability and the viability of these communities is the difficulty in being able to service them. That the drive to bring people to cities and towns lifts the socio-economic conditions of people because they have access to services. And if you look around the world, and I've lived overseas for a large part of my adult life, and particularly in China, where China has undergone a massive transformation because it was able to move people from the regional areas to the cities and lifted 500 million people out of poverty. It is a logical question, isn't it, to ask whether the same would apply here if it is so difficult to deliver the services that are needed to these communities.
Stan, I think that there's a clear truth about all of that in terms of what's happening on a global basis. But I think you have to look at this much more at a regional level, and also on the basis that the numbers of people that we're dealing with are comparatively very, very small. And it ought not to be beyond the capacities of government and indeed our levels of technology to be able to deliver services to such a small group of people, albeit in remote Australia. I think there are examples where we are delivering and have delivered services to people in remote parts of Australia, but we haven't asked them to leave their land in order that they take advantage of those services. I think, for example, pastoral farming and other remote areas, we have, for example, in respect of education, distance education, and we have technologies now that are able to deliver those services in ways which are consistent with the expectations of governments in relation to education and the levels and standards that should be achieved. So I think that looking at the global situation is one thing. Responding to people's needs at the regional and local levels, I think, is achievable, and I think it ought not to be a reason to withdraw the support for Homelands and outstations across this country. We ought to have the wit and the capacity to respond and meet the needs of the people as they have identified them.
But Bill, you touched on... You touched on having some success, but the statistics damn Australia and damn the delivery of services and policy directed to socio-economic uplift when you have a group of people who still occupy the bottom rung of every socio-economic indicator in Australia, and that people in remote communities bear the brunt of that. So why the failure, if, as you have said, it can be done, why is it not demonstrably not being done?
Well, I think it takes more than one to tango, and I think we've got to look very much at the way in which governments respond to the delivery of services or respond to the needs of people. When I first arrived here in 1965, there were elders, the names of whom are on the edges of the bark petition, and who sought not only to protect their land, but also to meet their responsibilities and obligations in respect of that land. the government policy at the time was not to encourage people to return to their lands, but to be administered within easy reach of those services that government wanted to provide. As a consequence, you have what were those administrative centres. Today we call them growth centres, but they are nonetheless the same places. And whilst we do deliver, and there is a compulsion, I guess, on the part of government to try and economise the delivery of those services by gathering large groups of people together, it isn't necessarily the best way to do things. And I think the statistics that you referred to and the history you referred to somewhat reflects that disconnect between what Aboriginal people have sought to achieve and how governments have responded to those needs.
Well, let me ask someone who's directly involved. Anthony, I'll just go back to you before we move to other people on the panel. How do you respond to that? Where is the failure? Where is the log jam in the system that these services are not getting through?
We had a lot of challenge within our region. Like WA is a big engine room towards generating funds for Australia, and we had pushback with our government towards supporting our communities. And if they want to reduce the funds to our community, then we need to be part of the process towards how we can help our communities do that transition process. So there's been a one-sided view. We had to get national attention towards pushing the government from closing the communities to trying to engage with us. So we've done our work in pushing the government back. And so there is an engagement process that the WA government is working towards. But yeah, it has been a long time coming, and we need changes, and we've got systems that we want to work closely with the government towards doing reforms and better service our community. So it is a problem that we want to address all of the social issues and other issues that face our communities, and we're looking forward for that engagement. So yeah.
So Samuel, we heard from Anthony and we heard from Bill about the partnership, that this cannot be one-sided. Tell me about the Northern Land Council experience. You deal with remote communities, the Homelands movement. How do you get that relationship happening with the instruments of government to be able to deliver those services?
Excuse me, I've got a flu at the moment. I'm trying to get over it. Look, communication is one of the best things about it. Homeland is most important for our people. My grandparents are from the Blue Mud Bay, Yilpra way, Durrubibi, and up to Cape Shield, my grandmother's place. But I sort of grew up in Mununggurr way, so where a lot of outstation. I went to a school called Cadell, and Cadell was one of the bigger outstation in that region where a lot of attention was because of farming and all other stuff and that, where a lot of people lived there and live in better health with growing of fresh veggies and all this stuff. For the outstation people, I think the government should understand that Aboriginal people don't want to live in a bigger community. They want to live in an outstation where there's no trouble, no alcohol, no ganja, no ice, no other stuff and that. And that's where home is, I suppose, our mother's country.
But Barry, talk about that. We just heard from Samuel there. People want to live in these communities because they can escape the pressures of the towns and the social problems of the towns. Tell me about the growth of the Homelands movement and what it means.
Right on. Thank you. I understand. And to move to our homeland, back to our homeland, is because here there's a lot of destruction. Young people were dying at younger age. And when the old people sat around and said, hey, come on, this is not right. We got to do something. And that's when they made, back in 1970, the movement, the Homeland movement. And it was to move away from all these. We are now living on our country where it's more healthier, the environment is great. We are living on our own country, our home, on our own homeland, homeland where our heart is. And that's where we want to stay. Nobody is going to move us. Nobody. And we shall not be moved by the thing that Mr. Prime Minister said about
Lifestyle choice.
lifestyle choices. We got a lifestyle, but we have it over there. We don't have to do that. We are obliged to be with our home where it's firm, strong, and solid, with a lot of culture, a lot of song, a lot of spirituality. And that's where our heart is. Thank you.
Yananymul, can I ask you what it means? We just heard there from Bariaway talking about the importance of being on your land, practicing your culture in a land that matters to you. I want to ask about what it matters to young people, because so much of this discussion is about the future of young people. And we hear from the Prime Minister and others that young people need to have an education. They need to go away to school. They need to learn about the wider world and the ways of white Australia. But what about the importance of the education and the example that young people get from living in homelands?
Education is number one priority for young people living in the homelands. When we first had the homeland movement, one thing our elders spoke of before was that education would be a big part of our lives. And to this day, we still, we have schools out there, but there is not enough assistance coming in from both governments, anti-government, federal government. Education is number one for us. We want to have our kids educated properly, like that of other kids living in communities, living in townships, living in cities. One of the things we had in one of the homelands was we had the SHEP program, the secondary education program. That's been taken off us. We don't have that secondary education program. And the government, the anti-government has left us in the dark here because we don't know what's happening, what's going to happen with the education program. And education is very important for our kids. That's the number one priority. We want to be able to see our kids educated, so they can grow up and they can speak English like me, like many others in this shelter, sitting under this shelter. They can be able to communicate properly with the broader community. They can be able to get proper jobs, salaried jobs. They can be able to become doctors, pilots, nurses, teachers.
But Barry, before we came up, we were talking, me and you, about the young people and about education. How important is it as well, the education that they get from you and your culture from being on a homeland?
Well, when the old people started moving back to the homeland, the two priorities were education and health. Okay, with education, it is important, very, very much so, because that is the way forward for our children to go from the primary school up to get to a real world. And it's unlocked the outside world with the education.
There's also another education, isn't it? And that's the education of your own culture.
And
being amongst your own people.
culture. That is, so one example I must tell you this, is a tourism that happens at my place. I get school kids coming in over there all the time, and they're fabulous. They come over there and see that they see it with an eye-opening, the education that we give to them, exchange program. And that is the thing that must be told to the world, the education. You know, we go to school, you got to come to our school.
So, Samuel, just talk about that. We hear that a lot, the need for Indigenous kids to understand the white world. But what about the understanding of their own world?
I do agree with Brower there, my brother-in-law. Two-way learning is one of the most important things for our people. You must understand the white man law, and and our people must understand the white man law, and also the white man law should understand our law. That can better us for not only for both sides, for our people to understand the law a bit more better when they move on to the next generation.
Nolan, what about the West Australian experience? Again, when we heard from the Premier as well as the Prime Minister, it all seemed to revolve around the future of children and the ability for children to have opportunity. That opportunity that appears to be denied in remote communities. Talk to that and what's needed to improve that opportunity.
Yeah, look, I think we're all in agreement about what are the priorities in our communities. That's not so much the problem. The problem is about when there is a way that takes into account our needs according to our input and our approval. Simple things like the UN free and informed consent. And so when you look at that decision from the state government, the announcement, the statement that was made, there was no consultation, there was no engagement. Decisions are being made without having the level of input from us to determine our futures and what happens to our community and our children. So, I think it's important, we're working on a process you saw the other day. Empowered communities is about changing the way government does business and for us to take greater responsibility in driving and determining outcomes. So our future obviously is our children. It's important. We're all in agreement with that. It's just the way it occurs doesn't quite happen the way it really should.
Well, Bill, I'm going to ask the government question, because we can sit here and talk about the ideal, but we also know that we live in a time when we don't gather enough income as a nation through taxation and other sources to pay for what we need to pay. Not enough comes in for what is going out. We hear that from the government all the time. We look at the level of debt that the country carries. We hear about the need every time the budget is brought down about the need for cuts and to make those changes. Indigenous communities are not immune from those changes and the expectations of delivery on the money that is spent and the services that are delivered to those communities. So in an era of straitened times, in an era when we are seeing everyone having to tighten their belt, how do remote communities make a case that they need to remain open and viable?
Stan, I can assure you that the communities that I deal with have very, very tight belts, and they don't have excessive budgets or money to deal with. They live on a monthly basis almost, day to day, not knowing and having no predictability about what support they may or may not get over 12 months, let alone over 3 years, or any planning capacity. The communities are not mendicant. They aren't people sitting out there waiting for the next handout or waiting for the next government grant to appear. They're very active, they're very involved, and indeed many are employed in real jobs. Rangers make up some 80% of our workforce of 120 people. They're real jobs, they're out there, they're caring for country, they're doing things that are useful and making a contribution not just to their communities but to the nation as well. And I think we have to see homelands and outstations as a part of the nation and not at some sort of extreme and some sort of unique or quaint artefact of history. They're not. They're part of our community, and they make a contribution to our nation if they're allowed to make that contribution, and many do. If I can just give you a couple of examples of where there is a disconnect between the rhetoric of public policy and the way in which it's applied. Take, for example, in respect of education. We've heard much here today and yesterday about education and its importance, and we all agree about that. But for the homelands, the 30 communities or so and the 1,200 people that live in them just south of here, in northeast Arnhem Land, the schools that are there get about 2.5 days where teachers are available. But we're told by the government that you have to have 5 days, at least 5 days. Well, we've got kids lined up to go 5 days if we can actually get the teachers in place. It's not the attendance of the kids, it's the attendance of the teachers that we require an improvement on. It's not the teacher's fault, it's the resources that are given over to responding to that need. And there are children attending this Garma who were rewarded for having above a 90% attendance rate. The average rate of attendance when teachers are in place is 80%. So I think there's a gap that needs to be filled, and it's the gap between rhetoric and practice when it comes to putting these particular policies onto the ground. There is a tremendous difference. And lastly, I just want to point to housing. We all believe in housing, of course, and we want housing, and we've got good houses on many of the communities. But the current policy of the Commonwealth and of the Northern Territory Government is that there will be no new houses built on homelands. And that covers some 450 or so discrete communities in the Northern Territory. There's no indication as to what the alternative is. We're just left to figure out that ourselves. Now, that can have a significant impact over time on whether or not the people can remain in these areas. These little subtle pressures motivate people to think that they're being persuaded to leave their homelands and to go back into the administrative centres. And I think that is something that needs to be part of a negotiation, or in today's parlance, a conversation needs to be developed, and we need to start negotiating along the lines of the empowered communities paradigm.
I'll just follow up with you on a couple of things there. That is, it's been acknowledged, and you acknowledge this from your time in the public service, that often there can be just an avalanche of red tape, a bureaucratic logjam that can get in the way of the delivery of services. The Prime Minister has said that he is looking to free that up, reducing the number of departments, centralising it within his office, establishing an advisory committee that can speak directly to him. He calls himself the Prime Minister for Indigenous Affairs. Is this the answer? Is he on the right path here in acknowledging that there is a bureaucratic logjam that needs to be streamlined and driven from the top to get the money directly and the resources directly to the people who most need them?
Certainly, I think that there is a change in the wind. There is now an acknowledgement that top-down administration control is not the way to go. It has not proved to be effective. It has been divisive, and it leaves in the hands of people with no experience at the ground level policy making, decision making on matters in which they have very little experience. So what we need, and what I believe is beginning to emerge, is the notion that we have place-based solutions. There's another little bit of jargon for you. Place-based solutions. But what it means is we're going to engage not we, I'm no longer part of the government, I've been long gone from the government, but it is being proposed that there will be engagement at the local level and that the response of government will be through those agreements that are negotiated at the local level, and they will not be a one-hat-fits-all type of proposition. That can't be a useful solution. It has to be recognised that you have tailored solutions to meet the needs of specific communities. I believe that that's where the Prime Minister would like to head, and I would endorse that and I would support it, and I hope that that's what we will begin to see. The one problem we have is always that the rhetoric is great, the implementation is what is important, because good policy can be destroyed by lousy implementation, and that's what you've got to get to, and that's what we haven't got to yet.
Yananymul, can I ask you about that? The gap between the talk and the good intentions and the delivery, and whether there is enough collaboration and cooperation with the people most affected, the Indigenous people themselves.
I don't think that collaboration is happening. There is not enough engagement with the people affected, the Yolngu people and the government. We need to have a better relationship. We need to bridge that gap, because we're still not getting enough services into our communities, into the Yolngu communities and into the homelands as well. So we need to have that proper dialogue in place.
Are there too many public servants?
Yes. I might say yes.
Anthony, a couple of things that Bill mentioned there. People are contributors. They're not passive. They're not sitting around waiting for a handout. But I have to say that if you spoke to people in the city, that would be the perception that they would have. How do you build a viable economic base that can grow from the input of government to the point of self-sufficiency, where you have jobs, where you can invest in education, where the communities themselves have the economic power to determine their future?
You've got to start at the community, in building communities to have incentives. And some of them stuff are basic stuff towards getting them to have driver's license and such, and preventing them from going into jail. So it's hard. Our organisation struggled towards funding every year and to provide that service. And it gets difficult because a lot of agencies that are duplicating a lot of the service that are failing us. So we work towards our organisation that can know the needs and lift our communities, our members, towards meeting those ambitions. So there are sites of all the enterprise development, tourism and such. So there are a lot of dreams that a lot of our mob are moving towards those areas, and it is frustrating towards establishing those businesses. But there are a lot of Indigenous businesses that are thriving within our region.
The same, Samuel, goes for the Northern Territory. In the Northern Land Council, you've seen the development of business and enterprise in communities. Probably not enough, but how do you, I put that question to you as well, how do you grow an economic base that gives people the ability to determine their own future, free potentially of government?
I'll speak on a little clan group that I look after back home in Barunga. They do receive royalties, and they spend most of the money on try to do economic development. They built a little 8-bedroom hotel style, and just started to talk to Outback Store to take over the lease when Outback Store become entering a management agreement with Outback Store to manage the store that they look after on their land. But I must say that a lot of Aboriginal people where I come from is got a lot of dreams. Most of these people don't receive royalty monies, and some people rely on ABA grants to tap in ABA grants to start up business in their homeland, back in their communities or homeland. But they always get denied when they apply for grant with ABA, because you must have a Section 19, you must have you got to be part of the Prime Minister and Cabinet's trying to find a word for it, because a lot of my people, where I come, I talk about the Katherine area and VRD and Nooka and Borroloo area, that do business plan, they do a feasibility plan, and they put them up to ABA, and they get denied and they get knocked back. And maybe the government, the federal government, and especially the Prime Minister and Cabinet in Darwin should really start thinking about supporting Aboriginal people, starting economic development, and that's where it starts. You need to support them. They need money to establish it. Some people don't receive quite amount of money or royalties. Some people do, some people don't.
Yeah, Nolan, a lot of the discussion that we're having here almost puts the responsibility back onto Indigenous people to justify why they should stay in their own land. I want to talk to you about the rights that people have, internationally recognised rights, to be able to live where they choose to be able to live on their ancestral land. And if you look in places like New Zealand, in North America, parts of Europe where Indigenous people have treaties or have various forms of sovereignty, what does the United Nations, the international community, say about the right, let alone the economic viability or whether governments can service communities or not, but the fundamental right that people have to choose where they live?
Look, I think we're probably talking about native title, where our rights stem from. If you understand that there's a significant judgment that says that overturns terra nullius, it begs the question that sovereign rights exist. And with that, supposedly there are other things that are meant to be recognized and that need to occur. We haven't seen that. And, and also let's be clear that rights is not something that somebody gives you. It's inherent. We aren't given rights, we have rights. And the whole issue and the discussion that's happening now with the changes to the Constitution and reform, it's about that recognition, and it's the tilt, I guess. It's what's wrong in Australia that they haven't caught up with, developments in other countries, despite some of their problems, like any country. Other things have been in place where you've had, constitutional recognition, sovereign recognition, our history about being recognised as citizens, a whole range of things. And I guess that's what's wrong here. That's the missing link. We're not being treated as people in the systems of Australia, the institutions, all of the things that really indicate a level of rights that's comparable, that says that we're on equal ground in other areas of our lives. And statistically, that's reflected, and there's a reason for that. It's because of that lack of right. More things need to happen. I was thinking about what happened in the Territory when they suspended the Racial Discrimination Act. If the government had decided to jackboot into inner suburban Melbourne, took over people's houses on the basis of, or under the guise of protecting children, it would be a major upcry. So there are some things that are acceptable, and we when we talk to non-Indigenous people here, I suspect that the higher percentage of people here, or if not all of them, we're talking to the converted. The point is that if you look at, I'm reminded that was it Edmund Burke talks about in order for bad things to happen, good people do nothing. And so, we know there's a lot of good non-Indigenous people out there doing things, but when you see what happened here in the Northern Territory, if people see something on TV that's happening somewhere, they go, they're eating their dinner, they go, oh, that's terrible, and you go back to their meal. And that's the point. This isn't about a battle that Aboriginal people are having, trying to adjust and fix a system in Australia that does not reflect our rights. This is really about Australia as a country doing something to address that there is a tilt and there is a disadvantage and there is a lack of equal rights for Aboriginal people.
But Barriaway, I want to ask you about that. Do you feel as if there are two sets of rights, two standards in Australia, that there can be an intervention into Indigenous communities, as we heard there Nolan say, that wouldn't be accepted in the cities or in white communities? Do you feel as if you have to always make the case for the rights that you have as not just an Indigenous person, but as an Australian citizen?
Yes. See, we have been sitting here and talking, shouting, our big tire squeaking loud, fighting hard for what is right and just for our people. I feel it's about time that government come to a term to listen, at least listen to us from that what is coming out from our heart and not from our mouth. That's what we want to see. We want to see that things should be equal, as my brother here said, treated equally. Yolngu and Ngapaki. And that is what is, we cry over that. Because what is it? What's this treatment to the first people of Australia? We should be treated equal in this nation of ours.
Thank you. Yananymul, can I ask you about that as well? And we heard about the intervention, and in the cities, when we heard about the intervention, it was always, we need to save children, we need to save people from abuse. And clearly, there may be an element of that, but the way that that was carried out, can you talk about the intervention and what it meant to people?
Really, from my personal point of view, intervention meant nothing to me. Intervention was a racist thing for Yolngu people. It was a racist way that government rolled out those measures. It meant nothing. Intervention brought nothing to our communities. Intervention brought more anger, more sadness, more sorrow, because we felt, Yolngu people felt that our way of life, our control was taken away from us. Government was doing all these things to us. Government just come in and took away our rights and left us with nothing. So really, intervention was another way of alienating Yolngu people from this nation. We were like aliens to the government. That we were being treated as second-class citizens. It was a disgrace for the government to do that to the first people of this nation. We should be treated equally. Yolngu, Kangapaki. We call ourselves Australians, and that's how we should be treated, Australians. We should walk hand in hand to towards what we want to achieve for ourselves, what we want to achieve for Australia, what we want to achieve for our kids. We should walk hand in hand, go work together, can stand together, stand united as all Australians.
Sam, for all of the pain that we've heard here about the treatment of people in remote communities, tell me just quickly about whether the intervention worked, whether it achieved anything.
Stan, I think I don't want to go there because otherwise I'll keep going till the night sunset. Look, I do agree with Yananymul. Intervention didn't do anything for us. Look, I criticised the intervention myself because of how they just came in and took over communities. When they came and took over the communities, they also came and took over the stores. And I'm not a big fan of Outback Store, but that ties Aboriginal people now to work closely with Outback Store, you know. But and with the intervention itself, I remember walking with my kid's mum to one of the shops, and she had a bit of bruise and something else on her arm, but she plays rugby, and everybody stared at me, thought I was a bloody woman basher. Sorry to use the word bloody. And I'm going, hang on, I don't do those things. She plays sports, you know what I mean? When intervention was first announced, everybody just stared at me and looked at me, and I always I felt embarrassed and shameful. And I'm a grandfather of 10. I got 7 granddaughters, and I sort of distanced myself when intervention first was announced, but it's really made me look like a little boy again with intervention. That's how racist it was towards us Aboriginal people.
Thank you, Sam. We have about a minute left, and I just want to leave the final word to someone who has spoken so powerfully today. And I just want to leave the final word to you, Barriaway, about what it is for people to care. Do you think people care about the plight of your people?
People should care about what we are saying. You know, we would like to work with the Northern Territory government. We will work with the Northern Territory government and with the Commonwealth government, but don't walk ahead of us. We want to walk with you. We want to go side by side and go forward together.
And there is no better way we could finish that discussion. Thank you so much for being so honest and so candid and so emotional about the way that you've defended your rights and your right to live in this country as Australians. Thank you to everyone who's been watching over this past hour.